Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Forms class. Today we've got Form 22K. We're going to dive into the identification of utilities. What does this mean? We're going to go over the insights to some of the challenges with the 22K, especially when it comes to these unpaid utility charges that sometimes our buyers get slapped with. So we're going to deep dive on that. And then after that, we're going to go through and look at the 22L, which is the lease review, which is an important one, especially when you have buyers who are buying properties with tenants in there. It's a really good idea to have those in each of your offers and being able to really review those things in depth to make sure whatever your buyer is buying into that they fully conceive whatever rights that tenant has to that property before they buy it. All right, let me share my screen. And let me go ahead and hide the bar. All right, so jumping over to 22K first. Before we do that, we need to kind of take a look into Form 21. And I know we went over this probably a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. But the identification of utilities is right on Form 21, 28. And of course, manufactured homes as well. Services of closing agent for payment of utilities. So requested. So if you're going to request, right, attach Form 22K. And of course, add it on the addenda line to show that it's included. Marking the wave box means you're not going to have escrow settle any of those utilities, which is very dangerous. I've had many stories in the past seen where buyers will get under contract and then all of a sudden they get, they go in to try to go turn on utilities and I go, yeah, sure, you can get this turned on, but please pay the $3,800 outstanding bill first. And they're like, what? And then come to find out it was a non-lienable utility. And we're going to kind of dive into on what's lienable, what's non-lienable, because those are the only ones that escrow can settle. So let's look at there. We got to read this one again in order for it to make sense. Okay, closing costs, prorations, and charges and assessments. Seller and buyer shall each pay 1/2 of the escrow fee unless otherwise required by applicable FHA or VA regulations. Taxes for the current year, rent, interest, and lienable homeowners association dues shall be prorated as of closing. Buyer shall pay buyer's loan costs, including credit report, appraisal charge, and lender's title insurance, unless provided otherwise in this agreement. If any payments are delinquent on encumbrances, which will remain after closing, closing agent is instructed to pay such delinquencies at the closing from money due or to be paid by seller. Buyer shall pay for remaining fuel in the fuel tank if prior to closing. Seller obtains a written statement from the supplier as to the quantity and current price and provides such statement to the closing agent. Seller shall pay all utility and internet charges, including unbilled charges, unless waived in specific term number 12. Seller and buyer request the services of closing agent and the dispersing funds necessary to satisfy unpaid utility charges in accordance with RCW 6080. And seller shall provide the names and addresses of all utilities providing service to the property and having lien rights. Attach MLS, Northwest MLS Form 22K, identification of utilities or equivalent. Okay, so let's take a peek at RCW 6080. See which ones. Okay, so unless the context clearly requires otherwise, the definitions in this section apply throughout this chapter. Except as otherwise provided in the subsection 1, charges including all lawful charges assessed by a utility operated under all these chapters. Evidenced by a recorded lien, recorded covenant, recorded agreement, or special assessment, roll filed, with the city or county treasurer or assessor, and not billed and collected with property taxes, I'm assuming. And penalties and interest and reasonable attorney's fees and other costs of foreclosure if foreclosure proceedings have been commenced. Closing agent means an escrow agent or a person exempt from licensing requirements under the RCW 184421, handling the escrow on the sale of the real property. Real estate agent means a real estate broker, real estate salesperson, associate real estate broker, or person as defined in RCW 1885-10. And then business day means a day the offices of the county or counties in which the utility in question provides service are open for business. So let's go back. At this one. So seller of real property responsible for satisfying lien, closing agent's duties and liabilities and fee. Unless otherwise stated and acknowledged in writing by the purchaser, the seller of a fee interest in real property is responsible for satisfying upon closing any lien provided for by RCW, on and on and on. No closing agent may refuse a written request by the seller or purchaser of a fee interest in real property to administer the disbursement of closing funds necessary to satisfy unpaid charges, as charges are defined in the RCW 6085, except as otherwise provided in the subsection 2. A closing agent who refuses such a written request is liable to the purchaser for unpaid charges for utility services covered by the request. A closing agent is not liable if the closing agent's refusal is based on the seller's inaccurate or incomplete identification of utilities providing service to the property, or if a utility fails to provide an estimated or actual final billing or written extension of the per diem rate as required by the RCW 608020, or if disbursement of funds necessary to satisfy the unpaid charges would violate the RCW. A closing agent may charge a fee for performing the services required of the closing agent by this chapter, which fee may be in addition to other fees or settlement charges collected in the course of ordinary settlement practices. So there's kind of like the main piece to the revised code of Washington on the duties of a closing agent and what they're supposed to do. Did you guys catch that one key thing? What was something that you heard throughout that was like, ooh, they don't, if that thing's not done, then they don't have to do it. What is that?
Liable? I see. Well,
No, they won't be.
agent.
Basically, if you don't get the 22K to them and explain from the seller who all the utility companies and everything is, they don't have to settle it.
If we don't, as a buy side, on the sell side.
Oh, well, Amit's got a question. He's like, is it on buy side or is it on the sale side, the listing side? Well, whose job is it to fill that out?
Listing side, right? And the seller should be filling it out.
It's the seller's, right, job that the seller must know and disclose all of the utility companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can look at all of these different ones. We have a water district, sewer district, irrigation district, garbage, electricity, gas, or any special districts, local improvement districts, or any utility local improvement districts, which there could be. Very rare that you get that one, but.
So Eric, there's no place on there for the HOA.
Good catch. So when HOAs are responsible for handling the utilities, right, and it's part of your dues, what do we typically do with this form?
I'll say HOA and I'll say CC retail service, whatever, blah, blah, or just.
Yeah, you're gonna write water district if the seller even knows who the water district is, I highly doubt it. Probably not. But you would just write HOA responsible for water district payment. Cause it's in the dues, so it's. You're trying to identify that, hey, we don't have to worry about this being settled because. Basically, all the dues are handling the payments to the company, because the whole HOA is responsible for. Actually, the entire payment for the whole community.
So
Okay.
you said lienable HOA dues, I think was part of the RCW. So where would that fall in?
Yeah, so who's got lienable rights for utilities to the property? How are you guys gonna know that?
It will be in the resale service, should be right, you're talking about if there's past payments.
Well,
due.
for a condo, let's say it's a single family residential,
You can-
no HOA. How do you know what's lienable, what's non-lienable?
Once you contact the title and see what,
Yeah, you could reach out to the title company and ask and inquire and say, are these utilities, or, what utilities are lienable? I do have a very nice handout that this came from Equity Title from a few years, quite a few years ago. But it's utilities, the key to your 22K, and it lists out King County utilities, all of the companies. And it has Pierce County Utilities, Thurston County, a few, and very few of the Snohomish County utilities. But it has their phone number and their website for each one of them. So, and for those of you on the Zoom, let's see if I can, I might have to stop share. I think, because I don't know if I can. You guys can't see that, can you?
No, but I can pick up that handout here in a little while.
Let me see if I can do this. I don't think I can put it into browser. No, I can't. So here, let me escape real quick. Stop share. Let me share again. All right, so now you guys should be able to see this. I can move this around here. Oh, come on. Wait. Grab the thing, there we go. Okay, so here are the utilities. So it's got all the companies listed out, got the city of Redmond utility billing. There's the water utility company, phone number, and the website. Pretty nice to kind of have all that, because most of the time, sellers don't know. Sellers don't know. It actually states when we get to the section, it does state that brokers can fill this out if no one does. How many buyer brokers write up deals and you notice they don't even have the 22K uploaded in the supplements filled
for
in?
sure, I always send a blank.
How many? Yeah. Yeah, they don't
Eric?
have it. You gotta include it.
Eric, can
Yes.
you somehow get it to us, on Zoom, this page?
I can. Watch this.
Thank you.
Oh, actually. Go to chat. I'm gonna throw it in the chat real quick. There you go. So all of you can download that, save it to your computer. But it is nice having this to be able to see exactly what to fill in. Whenever you see one of these 22Ks uploaded in the supplements and it's filled in with the name of it, phone number, and the website, like, it's rare. What do you typically see? What do you typically see on the 22K filled in?
Uh,
Just the name.
Just the name, that's it. But we just read the RCWs that what? It has to disclose who the companies are in order for title and escrow, or excuse me, for escrow to disperse and make those payments, doesn't it? Isn't that what it said? If it's not filled in? Most title companies and escrow companies understand that this is just one of these left sock of the industry. It just is a bad habit, and it is continued on and on and on. And they just take care of it for you guys a lot of times, because they know how upset is a buyer going to be if those things aren't settled and they can't turn on power or can't turn on water. So very important to understand how that exactly works. All right.
And you have copies of those sheets printed out right here?
I have a couple, so yeah, you guys will get some. Let's get back to our main screen. All right. Okay, corresponding paragraph in Northwest MLS purchase and sale agreement. Northwest MLS purchase and sale agreements, except for Form 25 vacant land, obviously, each contain a separate paragraph, Form 21, paragraph 15, services of closing agent for payment of utilities, containing a checkbox option by which the buyer and seller can agree. One, that the services of the closing agent are waived, and thus handling the payment of of unpaid utility charges outside of escrow, or two, that the services of the closing agent are requested. We specifically use the word waived to make it easier for brokers to explain to buyers and sellers that the seller is required to include a request to the closing agent in the agreement unless both parties waive those services in writing. If neither box is checked, then closing costs and prorations paragraph of Form 21 provides that the parties request the closing agent's services, and Form 22K should be used. Pretty much going to make sure you're using 22K in every deal. All right, let's see. Karen, you want to read C?
C, seller is required to provide names and addresses of utility providers within 5 days of mutual acceptance. The identification of utilities addendum provides sufficient space for listing the names and addresses of utility providers in a legible manner. NWMLS recognizes that even if the parties agree that the closing agent should pay unpaid utility charges through escrow, buyers typically will write an offer without having any idea of the names and addresses of utility providers, and sellers often may want to accept such an offer without having immediate access to those names and addresses. To help avoid transactions from failing simply because the parties did not have the information handy at the time the agreement is signed, the form provides that if the names and addresses of utility providers are not filled in at the time of mutual acceptance, then the seller has 5 days, or as otherwise agreed, to provide the information to the listing broker for buyer broker. Further, the buyer and seller authorize the listing broker for buyer broker to fill in the required information so that will become part of the agreement.
Yeah, so good job. Note, it is a good business practice for listing brokers to obtain this information from the seller at the time you take the listing. Yes, this absolutely should be done. If you're listing a condo or a, single family residential property, or even like the multifamily, you absolutely should have 22K already filled in. Name of the companies, the phone number, the website address, anything else that's applicable should be filled in. A lot of times people aren't good in knowing, so use this cheat sheet and you can find out from the property. But something to keep in mind, it's always a good idea that we tell our buyers that you need to contact all the service companies and verify that there's no unpaid payment still, that there's no unpaid charges that are still remaining for the property. It's a really good idea to get into the habit to make sure that we counsel our clients to do a due diligence, in the beginning and actually verify the information, right? We always want to retain that information verification period in every one of our deals, if at all possible. I know when you have you have multiple offer situations you guys are going to be in, and you're going to end up having to waive those. I realize that's going to happen. But, if the listing brokers really understood that, preserving that information verification period, it actually helps protect the seller. It does, because if the buyer didn't get a chance and an opportunity to not only inspect the property, but now not only to verify all the information, including what's being advertised by the brokers, marketing information even, right? Remember that story I told you guys that we got a buyer out of a deal because of the information verification period, and the broker messed up and left AC on the flyer, and it came from the previous listing. The marketing person just copied all the stuff for the new listing and accidentally left the home as AC, and it didn't. So we got him out of a deal that had no inspection.
Kind of random question, so I wrote an offer on a new construction site.
Yep.
In the builder specs, they listed tankless water heater throughout the units, the 9 units.
Oh, yeah.
And 8 of them, like 7 of them are sold, 1 is pending, which is about to sell, and so that 9th one is the only one, but they do not have tankless water heaters. They have the hybrid, electric.
Yeah.
And I was the first one to call it out. So I'm still trying to hopefully work this deal. It's roller coaster, but what happens in these kind of situations? And what about the 8 other people that closed? In the builder warranty, like the certain of the.
Yeah.
What happens? I put the verbiage in the 22D, like I told you, but what happens to the other 8?
Well, they've got a warranty for an item that's not in the property, so it's not probably going to be covered. Now, the manufacturer warranty probably will stand, but that'll be about it. You're not going to have, probably the builder warranty won't cover it because they're like, oh, we didn't actually install these for this. So yeah, that's probably exactly what will happen. So the form also makes clear that it remains the seller's obligation to pay all unpaid utility charges. See also the closing costs and prorations paragraph in the purchase and sale agreement, and that's what we read. So even though they're not, all lienable, right? Escrow is going to settle the lienable ones because that's the ones that they have a right to reach out and make contact to. But the ones that do not have lienable, right? They can't settle those. But just like we had read, it is the seller's responsibility to pay it. Who's going to make sure that they do that? You guys?
Well,
No escrow, right?
If it's non-lienable, hopefully you guys are working with a fantastic escrow officer that will tell you and reach out and say, hey, this specific water company is not a lienable utility, or this sewer company, it's a separate company. They're independently owned, operated. They have this whole town. Like we can't settle those. So you need to have the buyer reach out, or if you reach out, make sure you maybe got the buyer on the same line, something to that effect, to where, they're both there. You guys are both talking and communicating at the same time, and you can check to see that those utilities are actually settled, because otherwise you're not going to know. You're going to have no idea whether there's going to be charges left. So good idea is when you call those ones that are non-lienable, then find out how much is the remaining bill, and then it's time to communicate to the listing broker in writing. You want to do it in writing and state, hey, it looks like this water company still has an outstanding balance of $980.57. So we want to make sure, put notice, and the agreement states the seller will pay these prior to closing. We just want to make sure this gets done and that we get a copy of the receipt. If you do that, you are like probably the top 10% of all brokers in the state. Because everyone just like, it was shouted out on Zoom, is that everyone thinks, oh, escrow is going to take care of that. They're not. They can't they cannot do anything with non-lienable utilities. They won't settle them. Jason?
One thing that is probably a benefit to if you're representing a buyer, is to have them call like the power company and stuff like a couple days before and let them know when their move-in
Yeah.
date is. Because I've had buyers before where I've suggested them to do that and they didn't do it, and 2 days later their power's off.
Mhm.
So just let them know to put the utilities in their name.
Yeah, always, every few months we hear about this happening. Always. Whether we're buyer broker or even it's our own listings that the sellers we just think, oh yeah, the sellers know that, probably call and put, here's our closing date, but I would probably, tell by the next following day. Business day is when the transfer should take place, and they should take that out of your name. For the sellers even. Sometimes they do it on the closing date, and the next thing you know, that's the morning. And then they turn it off. Like we just had one at the beginning of the year. Like, hey, our seller turned off all of the utility, turned off the power and water, everything's off. And they came to do their walkthrough this morning because they didn't have any time. They were working through the week, and it's the only time the buyers could do it. They've already signed. And then now they're like telling to hold off closing to make sure nothing got damaged, because they're not having power turned on until the following day. They already scheduled it for the following day. So you really want to communicate to your sellers and communicate to your buyers that you try to get some overlapping like timeframes, if at all possible, just to avoid those issues, because you could literally blow up a water heater or something when there's no power to it for a while. Or what's even worse, during the winter, and we've seen this before too through the years, they shut off the heat. They're like, oh, they haven't lived in the house, it's been vacant. They're like, oh, someone's buying it. Great, they saw it, and then next thing you know, they turn off all the power and water, everything. And the next thing you know, if there's water remaining in the pipes and the walls, and it's an older home, not enough insulation, and boom, now you got a house that's broken pipes and flooding, way worse issues. So just gotta be really careful about communicating and making sure those are all ready to go.
Another one is insurance. Like if you're representing a seller,
Yeah.
if you have an extension or something, make sure that they are communicating with their insurance agent so that they still have coverage on the property if it extends like a couple of weeks or something.
Yeah. Insurance is a big one. You guys all know we had what's his name? The insurance guy that just came in. Dang it. Drawing a blank on his name. Yeah, great guy.
Yeah.
But just you guys, after hearing all that, the insurance nightmares, like that definitely is something we're gonna want to make certain that, our clients are covered. Especially
That's
now.
Douglas Olson.
Yep, Doug, thank you. All right, so date of the purchase, let's get the assistance in filling in the blanks. So obviously we got the date of the agreement, the buyer's names, the seller's names, the property address. And then here's the disclosure of the RCW, just like we read earlier. Oops, too quick. Next is number 5 is names, addresses, email or website, and fax numbers of utility providers. A lot of them don't even have fax anymore. So wouldn't, be surprised you don't have to get that one, but insert the names, addresses if possible, email or website optional, and fax numbers optional of all utility providers having lien rights against the property. Time limit, seller to provide information, insert the number of days following mutual acceptance by which the seller must provide the names and addresses of utility providers to the listing broker or buyer broker. The listing broker or the buyer broker should then promptly provide that information to the closing agent. Initials and dates, and then we good. Now, if you know for sure that one of these ones you're filling in doesn't have lien rights, I think it's a great idea to put in a parentheses right next to the name of the company and say non-lienable utility. Because this is all the name of the companies, right? I think that would be, again, now you're talking probably top 1% of all brokers who would do something like that. Because finding that information out is going to be very helpful. Most escrow companies know, which ones, that are connected. In fact, the next time we have title and escrow, which I think is on Monday, they've got a clock hour class. And it's about boots on the ground stories, all stories of stuff that they've worked with for a free 3 clock hour class from 10 to 1 on Monday. I think I'll talk to them and ask them about that, if they can describe, how we can find that other information out.
Eric,
Yes.
I have a question, Eric. On my screen, the sharing button is not turned on, so I can't access the chat room to get a copy of the utilities. I wonder if there's something you can do to turn on the chat room button there.
Chat is on.
Not not.
Yeah, I don't see it either.
Me either.
That's strange. Huh. That's weird. It shows everybody. Huh.
Another weird utility that I came across was in the Highlands, where they have fiber optics that are required by all the residents in there. So it's like in some areas, you might have some weird stuff in there that's not usual to other areas.
Was that you said in the Highlands?
Yeah, in the Issaquah
Yeah.
Highlands up there.
That
They have
doesn't
like
shock me.
Yeah, because every person is required for their fiber optics, or not required, but it's offered to them.
Mhm.
But is that leanable?
It's not leanable, but it's part of.
But it's part that they gotta have it.
It's part of their HOA.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not, we'll have to just send it out, you guys. Oh. Yeah, it says. Yeah, I don't understand. It's there. I don't, kind of weird,
One of those things you have to restart it, right?
maybe.
Hey, Eric, so I have a question. So if it's lienable, the title company will take care of it, but if it's not, and then I have to find out.
Yep. Gotta find, then you wanna make certain, you wanna have the buyer, it's the buyer's responsibility, it's not ours. Because see, if you miss it, who are they gonna be mad at? You. They're gonna blame you. They're gonna say, I can't even turn water onto my house because you didn't verify. So that's why it's important for you say, every time you get a buyer under the contract, say, hey, this is your opportunity to go verify all of the information. I think it's a good idea for you to call the utility companies, all of the county or the city or anybody that governs over the property so that you can find out, every single thing about this property that you can. Because Washington State's a buyer beware state. It's your responsibility. I can't warrant anything. That's why we include that 22D, right? Didn't we just do, yeah, we did 22D just a few weeks ago. So making sure that the very first box is that we're not responsible for anything. Like it's up to you to go verify it all the information.
And when you're a listing broker, a lot of times I like to tell my clients that the escrow will overestimate all of these
Yeah.
things. And you will typically get a check like 30, 60, 90 days after closing.
Yeah.
And the reason why they do that is because it's really hard for the utility company to go after somebody that's already moved out of the property.
Right.
So they just want to make sure everything is paid for before the transfer, and they overestimate 100% of the time.
Always. Oh, yeah. All right, time to jump to our next form. This is the lease review addendum and purchase and sale agreement. It's a pretty short one, but it is important. Literally dealt with someone, a deal that we've had in our office happened it was supposed to close in December, but then it ended up closing in January. And the situation was our broker listed this property. It was multi-family. They did double list it, and in the listing, they did write double listed because they did residential and multifamily. Because this had a dadu and a separate ADU connected, also to the house. So it's basically like 3 units. So like a triplex almost. So anyway, in the remarks too, agent only remarks, it stated that please, use the multifamily purchase and sale agreement. This broker who wrote it up was inexperienced and wrote it on residential. And they did not include Form 69. If you guys don't know what that one is, then this is why we come to forms class, so you can try to remember all these things. Form 69 is a form to transfer all the leases to the new owner. Now, there is an RCW in the state of Washington that does state that a seller will transfer them, but you can have arguments, you can have people hold back and transfer all of the deposits, but you can have sellers who be like, nope, you didn't include it, I didn't agree to it, you bought it as such, and I got an attorney, so come fight me. So that's the reason why you would include that form. Well, this
69?
broker, did not include the Form 69, but he did not even include the 22L for the lease review. So it was basically, the client's just buying this as a single family residential. Maybe you moving family in there. How do we know? And so the seller's like, our broker told him, hey, more than likely they're going to want, obviously transfer all these things, but you could, that's up to you to deal with that in the future. And so anyway, they said, do you want to just sign off on this deal? Because it's a good deal. And he said, yep, I'm going to take it. So they took it. Got all the way to the closing. Last day of closing, they said, hey, I'm calling for keys. Can I have a copy of the leases? And they're like, well, you didn't formally request it in your deal. I got to get my seller to agree to hand it to you, which also they should do this. You have tenants living in a property. So there's RCWs that help protect for this. But again, our job is to put this all into the deal, right? To make sure that they get handled correctly. And you don't have to take somebody to court to get them. So anyways, finally the seller said, okay, fine, I'll give these, and then give it to the broker. And then they go, well, when do we get the deposits and everything? They're like, well, you didn't include this. We didn't think you wanted it. We thought you're just buying this. How do we know? He goes, and you wrote it on a residential agreement. So it was a huge battle. Designated brokers had to get involved. I had to get involved, back and forth, arguing with them. It's like, well, this is the seller's position. They thought that you were buying it as residential only. You didn't care. We didn't know. Wasn't our job to tell your broker what forms to use. He used the wrong form. And now we closed. So, it's kind of like it's on you guys. The seller was nice and he finally did say, yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and release all the stuff. But he took his time. He took his sweet time, which I guess I would too if you're in that position. So you got to make sure you're using the proper forms. And most of the time, you guys hear me say this a million times in forms class, and that is, there's a form for that. There's a form for that. Most of the time people try to write these addendums and language on a 34, when mostly it's already made. Pretty much every situation you can think of has a form. So let's take a look at the lease review addendum. General comments use. This addendum is intended to be used for the purchase of single-family property where the property is occupied by a tenant. The provisions in the addendum are similar to those in multifamily purchase and sale agreement Form 20. The addendum requires seller to make available to buyer the lease and all documents related to the tenant's occupancy of the property and allows buyer to terminate the agreement based upon buyer's review of those documents. The form also transfers any tenant's reserves to buyer and appropriately allocates rental payments between the parties. So again, you have payments that it's closing, they're in the middle of the month, part of the payment went, or the full payment already went, but it's going over into the next month already where the closing is going to take place. You've got some per diem days, right, that you got to calculate of how much money will the buyer get from that close or from the payments of the rental. So let's take a look at it. Assistance in filling in the blanks. You got the date, of course, the buyer's name, seller's name, the property address. lease books records, insert the number of days that seller has to provide buyer with all the documents related to the tenant's occupancy of the property. Okay, so seller shall make available to buyer as soon as practical, but no later than, so it's 10 days by default after mutual acceptance, all documents available to seller relating to the lease or rental agreement for the property and any other agreements relating to tenant's occupancy, including property management agreements, service contracts, and agreements with professionals or consultants, leases of personal property or fixtures, and a schedule of tenants' rents and deposits, maintenance records, and accounting records and audit reports. So first things first is getting a copy of all the books, the records, and agreements. You know, it's a good idea to go through that. What do you guys think? Would you, as a listing broker, would you give these items to a buyer broker before they wrote an offer? What do you think?
No way.
No? Wouldn't do it?
I wouldn't do it. No,
But why?
because a buyer who is, has written an offer is more committed than a buyer who hasn't. And I don't want to give them any reason to get cold feet before they even write an offer.
Yeah, I've I've asked questions like this in the past and during different types of forums, and a lot of times people will, you know, some people will state, I will give this because I don't want to go pending inspection and then them immediately terminate because they found a problem in the lease.
Well, it
Well, I've got-
depends on the market. If it's a busy seller's market, then yeah, you don't want to do that. But if it's a normal market, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, Ahmed, what were you gonna say?
I would just give it up front to avoid problems, and then if they're gonna
Oh.
want to review, why create an issue later, let's face it now, rather deal with it first. If you know what I mean, that we're, before you have to bring it to the seller and or, you know, whatever, it's,
Yeah,
let's get the ball rolling so we're on the same page. I
That's
mean,
Jason?
information, and say a competitor was trying to find some secret trade secrets or something, that you probably want to hold that really close. You actually have an interested party in place.
Yeah, so 100%, you guys, when it comes to leases, documents, books, records, and agreements, do not give those up until you are in an agreement. Now, sometimes we give things before people get offers or, you know, before they're actually in contract. And there's things that make sense for that. One could be like a pre-inspection that was done for the seller. They had an inspection performed.
Do this right now.
Yeah, so if you end up giving that out, you know, sometimes before, like sometimes people are like, okay, well, thanks, I'm done. Or they're not gonna make an offer. Was it based on the inspection?
Yeah. So-
Really?
Yeah, so the buyers didn't want to, the buyers had concerns about the roof,
Yeah.
and they didn't want to. In their mind, they're like, oh, the roof has to get replaced, so we don't even want to pay for an inspection. So they asked us, can your seller do a company take a look at the roof before we make an offer? And I was like, no, but we'll do that, but just write it up in your offer, because I don't,
Yeah,
what happened, you know. Like at least then whatever comes of that inspection, we can negotiate the brief contract
exactly.
versus them just seeing it and walking.
Yeah, okay, now there's gonna be case by case scenarios. You're gonna be in situations where you might do that. I think the ones that I have ever seen, especially when it comes to large commercial pieces, sometimes they have you sign NDAs before giving up those information, because if they're gonna release that type of information, you know, because sometimes they will not write things without having, they're very few, I'm talking limited things, but for the most part, most of the time, you are never gonna give those away until they're in an agreement. You want them to commit.
You might be able to say something like it's 80% occupied.
Yeah.
Or stuff like that, but none of the books.
Yeah, no. So-
Eric, I have a question. What if the property is leased, but the lease agreement is set to end prior to closing with the tenants actually being moved out prior to closing? Is there any disclosure of lease information due in that case?
Rent roll, yeah.
Yeah, rent roll, absolutely.
We'll have all when they started, when they expired,
Mhm.
what the rent payments are, when it was last, it should all be in their rent roll.
Yeah, all that information should be rent roll, just like Jason said. And it is up to the buyer for them to see that type of information, if it makes sense for them to close on something, knowing that, okay, a couple tenants might be moving out right before they close on it. Now they're not getting the income they thought that they were getting to do the purchase, so again.
But what if they're not purchasing it as an investment property?
You have to honor the leases.
Yeah.
If you're gonna use it as an owner occupied property, you don't have to renew the lease.
Yeah.
You can make them move out if you're gonna move into it, but if you're using it as a rental property, you have to honor that lease.
Yeah, well, you gotta honor the lease no matter what, if you're buying it. If you're buying it, you've gotta honor whatever their leases are. So whenever you see these properties that have tenants in it, that's the first question you need to find out is like, okay, when is this tenant supposed to be out? Are they month to month right now? Are you going to give the notice to vacate? You know, when, you gotta get all that information.
So if they are month to month, they have it listed, like they're ready to move, whatever, you know, could be negotiated, you're
not gonna renew the lease.
that you want to make sure you get it in writing prior to.
Making sure they're not renewing the lease, yeah, in writing. Alice, go ahead, what was your question?
Yeah, so this is a real world scenario. So I have a specific reason for asking this question. So the lease is actually up and notice given to the tenant within the 60 days prior to closing, and the house will go up for sale and not be sold as an investment property. Is the broker still required to give information about the lease and the fact that it was leased to the potential buyer if that's the scenario?
And in the example, you said the tenant is going to be moved out?
Right,
Before,
and they've had their 60-day notice prior to closing.
I would absolutely want to see a copy of the lease. If there's, if I would want to see a copy, if that thing is tenant occupied at the moment you guys go show that property. If it's on the market, it's tenant occupied.
Okay, so maybe that's the criteria. So if the tenant is out and it's being
Tenant's already
marketed.
out.
Okay,
Yeah, tenant's already out, then I wouldn't do
If
it.
there's a tenant in there that was month to month and
Yeah.
they're saying they're moving out and you buy that with a tenant in there and they don't move out, you're gonna have to go through the eviction process
Yeah,
which would be a full can of worms.
yeah, you're talking 90, 120, 180 days at least, right? Don't they have a 90-day to vacate?
Yeah, you have to serve them.
Yep.
And then if they don't move out, then you have to evict them. And that's all the court stuff,
Yeah,
the nightmare.
yeah,
So just, if someone says there's a tenant in there, just be aware that you could have a can of worms.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, for those of you that have, sellers and they've got it tenant occupied. I want you to be very, very careful when you hear these words. Oh, don't worry, it's a friend, family friend, they're just paying me for, they're renting the room. Right? Already you should have like, oh, danger flag should be like rising right about now, like, do you have a lease with them? Is there an agreement? No, they just pay me every month and they're fine to move out whenever. What do you think about that one?
don't they by law have a de facto lease just by the fact that they're paying rent?
Yeah, but you would have to follow the Washington State Tenant Law Act, and you have to issue a notice to vacate, even if you don't have a lease with them. And they gotta follow the exact same rules as if you did have a lease. It's basically like they're on a month-to-month lease. Those are some of the worst to deal with. Because a lot of times those people won't even move. They're like, are you kidding? Like, why would I leave this place? This is amazing. I'm 10 minutes from work. I'm paying $300 a month. I'm stacking cash. This is amazing. I'm not moving. No way.
You have to evict them or do a cash for keys to.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the worst ones is doing cash for keys, all those types of programs. And that literally is exactly what it sounds like. Okay, Mr. Tenant, I will give you $1,000 cash for your keys and see that you're totally moved out by this date. I'll show up. I've got the envelope of cash. You're gonna hand me the keys. I'm gonna walk through the property and see that it's vacated. And then at that moment, you've got the person changing locks with you. They're right there with you. You're not gonna be like, Oh yeah, later, because I've heard some horror stories where people are like, yep, we're all moved out. Great. They leave, they come back, they move right back in. Thanks for the cash. For real, I've heard some crazy, crazy nightmare stories.
I've seen someone have to pay the tenants 10 grand.
10 grand.
It was because they were living there and the seller just they had to sell the house fast, but their lease still had like 6-7 months left on it. And they're like, look, I gotta get this sold, like, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like they pick their poison. It's like either you give them $5,000 to move, or you're putting a $5,000 retainer for your attorney.
Yeah.
To get them to move. What's faster? And so a lot of times what people would do is they'd be like, hey, if you're out in 2 weeks, I'll give you 5 grand. If you're out in 4 weeks, you're getting 3 grand. If you don't get out, I'm gonna hire my attorney. We're gonna evict you. And now you're gonna have all these fees that are gonna be attached to you. You're gonna have a derogative rental moving forward. If someone calls me, you're not gonna ever rent anything again.
Yeah.
Take this money and leave. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Having rentals, it's a nightmare.
So, all right, let's keep going. So there's the lease review contingency is next. Alice, want to read 3?
Lease review contingency. Buyer shall determine in buyer's sole discretion whether buyer wishes and is able to assume all of the foregoing leases, contracts, and agreements which have terms extending beyond closing. If buyer does not give notice of disapproval within 5 days, if not filled in, of receipt of the above documents or the date that the above documents are due, then this lease review contingency shall conclusively be deemed satisfied unless waived. Or satisfied or waived. If buyer gives timely notice of disapproval, then this agreement shall terminate and the earnest money shall be refunded to buyer.
Okay, so if you end up terminating that from the lease review contingency, I believe there is a 90 form for this. Most of your 90s are connected to that. Notice, yep, for form 22L is a 90LR. Okay, and here it is. Buyer's notice of termination. Buyer hereby gives notice to seller that buyer disapproves the lease rental agreement or related agreements and or documents set forth in the lease review addendum to purchase and sale agreement, form 22L, and therefore elects to terminate the agreement and demands return of the earnest money. So there it is. You would include a form 50 to go with this if earnest money's been deposited, right? So send that along. And then you guys, are out of the deal.
And not all lease agreements that you see are equal. Some are legitimate lease agreements, others are like napkins. So you gotta be aware of what you're looking at.
Yeah, for sure. Next is the transfer of lease interests. Okay, so buyer shall be solely responsible for obtaining any required consents to assume any leases, contracts, and agreements. Seller shall transfer all of seller's right, title, and interest in and to the leases, contracts, and agreements by assignment, and buyer shall assume performance of all obligations under closing or upon closing. Deposits and rent. At closing, security, cleaning, and any other unearned deposits or other reserves shall be assigned or delivered to buyer. Rents collected from tenant after closing shall be applied first to rentals due most recently from tenant for the period after closing, and the balance shall be applied to the benefit of seller for the delinquent rentals owed for a period prior to closing. The amounts applied for the benefit of seller shall be delivered to buyer by buyer to seller promptly after receipt.
Sometimes if you're buying multifamily, you can't get into all of the units.
Yeah.
So when you do take possession, you want to give a 24-hour notice so you can do a walkthrough of each unit so you can see what the conditions are, because a lot of things you might not know.
Yeah, sometimes you'll get deals where it is all tenant occupied and it says you can't even walk the property view internally until they have mutual acceptance, and then a 48-hour notice will be issued to all tenants for you to walk through the properties. And then they got to do it again for the inspections. if you're having the property inspected. So it can be a, yeah, it can be a little bit of a game to get that
Another
done.
one, Eric, what do you think about, a lot of times you can, before closing, you can have, the rent payments paid directly to title and escrow for that.
Oh, I love that fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are ways title and escrow can do, they can set up payment accounts, and that can be set right from the time for closing to continue, especially if you have an independent owner who doesn't want a property management for the most part, but yet they want like, an easy way to kind of handle the payments and the deposits and stuff like that.
Proration.
Yeah, especially handling all the prorated, portions definitely is a good idea. Because otherwise, you're gonna be trying to work it out with the listing broker and say, hey, seller says we're closing on this day. The payments were already made. We don't get a full month, but we get this many days. So most of the time do a per diem charge, they divide the full payment by 30, right? And then you figure out this is how many days it is, times, time this divided by the per diem. Now you know like how much is that daily charge. This is how much money should get transferred. Well, it might not only be just that, it could be all of the what do you call it? The deposits, maybe a deposit, someone's moving out at the same time too. So now you got to be responsible for giving back that deposit and doing the walkthrough before you give the deposit back.
A lot of times with the deposits, they'll say in lieu of deposits, purchase price is lesser for blah, blah, blah. So then the deposits
Yeah.
are basically the responsibility of the new owner.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta work that out. That's a good point, Jason, that, once in a great while, you might even be doing that where you're reducing the purchase price to offset the deposits. And then the new owner's just gonna have that money saved that they didn't have to spend. Now they've got the deposits in their accounts because they saved the money. So you might be, in a situation where you're gonna have to work a deal and just work things out that doesn't sound typical in residential. That's because this more or less crosses over into that commercial world.
But anything less than 4 doors, though, you can get
Yeah.
residential financing in that, which is fantastic.
Oh, yeah, much better. All right. We got Form 69 coming in the future. We'll get to that one when we get to it, but that is it for today. Any last questions or anything, you guys? We're just a couple minutes over.
You could do a whole week on this.
I know. It's crazy.
Good info. Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys. And we'll send that out to you for the utility information from the title company. All right. Thanks for making it. We'll see you on the next one.